Welcome. This will be the Board of Select Board meeting, September 19th, 2018 at 5:30. And this evening, after our 5:30 regularly scheduled meeting, we'll be meeting with the Finance Committee at 6:30, and also Justin Cole from Bay State. For my announcements, I'd first like to thank Chief Gahn on his succession to President of the Hampshire Firefighters Association for a year. Thank you, Chief Gahn. And under this is, I don't know if John can see it, but on Thursday, October 11th, 2018, from 1 to 4 p.m., the Hatfield Board of Health downstairs in the town hall for a flu shot. And they just, it's on the website, and you just bring your health insurance, and it's for anybody over the age of 18. So they say over 18 insurance programs accepted are Rite Aid, Medicare Part B, Mass Health, TRICARE, Health New England, BCBS of Massachusetts. So there are no co-pays. So if you want a flu shot at that time, you can come on October 11th. That's my announcements. Brian, do you have anything?
Yes, I have one thing on behalf of the school department. On Wednesday, September 26th, the Hatfield Public School District will be hosting a screening of the documentary Screenagers, Growing Up in the Digital Age, for members of the Hatfield community and the surrounding areas. The documentary examines the effects of social media, video games, and internet addiction on the academic and family lives of teenagers, and has been shown in schools and communities across the country in order to teach parents about controlling screen time, limiting internet access, and how to help their children navigate in a digital world. Following the movie, there will be a community forum facilitated by the Northwest District Attorney's Office. So once again, the event will take place at the Hatfield Elementary School from 6 to 8 on September 26th, and childcare will be provided by the Smith Academy National Honor Society. And if you need more information or need to arrange childcare, you can call the superintendent's office at 247-0486. So thank you. That's all I had, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
unfortunately, our colleague Cindy Doty will be unable to be here this evening, just letting you know. But she will be back for the next meeting. Public forum, do I have anybody here for public forum? No, okay. Approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of February 28th, 2018, May 21st, 2018, May 29th, 2018, and June 20th, 2018.
I'll second the motion. Any discussion?
No, nice job, Key. There was a lot of notes there, so nope.
Okay,
I'm all set with
so
that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Our next posted business will be meeting with Open Space Committee member Mark Gillott, and he's going to discuss with us a proposed land donation, which includes 2 parcels, 10.3 acres on Old Stage Road for conservation purposes. And this would be pending boss approval pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 40, Section 8C. So, Mark, welcome, and thank you for all your work for the town of Hatfield, and thank you for coming here and letting us know about this possible donation.
Great, thank you, Board of Selectmen. Mr. Glover is not here tonight, but the Open Space Committee has met with him. Delbert Glover is the person who is going to be donating this land to the town if the board approves of that. As you said, Ed, it's a little over 10 acres. It's on the very end of Old Stage Road. It's actually in the section of Old Stage Road where maintenance is discontinued at this point. It's a pretty wooded area all around that area, and it's actually pretty close to an access point for the Horse Mountain Conservation Area, which was just acquired 3 years ago. So when Mr. Glover, he has since moved out of Hatfield, but these were parcels that he owned, and he wanted to donate these for conservation purposes. So if you read his letter, he would like to get this transaction finished by the end of the year. That's his goal. toward that end, I also went to the Conservation Commission meeting last week, and they reviewed this. They had also reviewed it a number of times before with Mr. Glover, and they are willing to accept this parcel because for conservation purposes, the Conservation Commission is entitled to accept donations for conservation purposes like this. We've also got a commitment, the Open Space Committee does, from Kestrel Land Trust to work with us at a reasonable, in a reasonable time period early next year to actually put a more restrictive conservation restriction on this parcel. So that will not happen this year because that takes a good bit of time, but we hope to get that done after the transfer to the town takes place next year. So what I'm looking for actually is a vote from the board to accept this parcel as a donation, and then it will be held for conservation purposes. And then next year, it would actually have a written conservation restriction, a formal conservation restriction, which would be drafted by Kestrel Land Trust and would be adopted, which would be held by Kestrel Land Trust, and the town of Hatfield would be the fee holder, the title holder of the land. So I think Marlene asked me to talk a little bit about the future goals. I mean, the obvious future goal for this was, it was right next to the Horse Mountain Conservation Area. This came to our attention that we could possibly, I mean, it could be connected just by using Old Stage Road, the right-of-way of Old Stage Road, so we could connect those. But we'd also like to make a more land connection if possible. So we always talk with adjacent landowners and see if they'd like to be interested in helping us to make pieces that are not contiguous for the conservation area. And if you look at that map, it would be more towards the south, more towards the south, and going a few parcels to connect it also to the east. So that would be the goal for that area. And that's it.
Great.
Any questions from Brad?
I don't have any questions. I would just like to make a comment to echo what you had said earlier, is to thank Mark and the others that are involved with continuing to try to find conservation land for the town, and to thank the Glovers as well. I like Mr. Glover's closing comment on the letter he attached to us, which is, although my wife and I are no longer residents of Hatfield, we recall fondly our time in the town and the many people who made it a memorable experience. This gift is a token of our appreciation. So, having said that, I'll make a motion to accept the land as the 10.3 acres on Old Sage Road for conservation purposes as presented this evening.
And I'll second that motion. Any more discussion? I just want to thank the Conservation Board also for all that work, and also I'd like to thank the Glovers, and I'm sure we'd like to send them a very sincere thank you letter, and that's very nice for Horse Mountain.
It is a very generous donation.
Motion made, motion seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. So perfect. Thank you, Mark, for
Thank you,
coming.
Ed, Brian.
Thank you.
Appreciate the
Yeah.
work. Yep.
If we could just add for the minutes that vote is pursuant to Chapter 40, Section 8C.
Okay. Do I need to announce that or?
No.
No. Okay.
Just,
Okay. So I announced it at the very beginning. So.
oh, you did? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you say that.
That's
Okay,
fine.
I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Topic 2, appointment to the Government Committee. We did have one member decided not to accept the appointment, and we have another resident that has stepped up to say they're interested in, and that'd be Larry Grossman to the Government Committee. Is that what we're calling it? Yes.
Yeah, governance, I think.
All right.
So I'll make the motion to appoint Larry Grossman, who has expressed an interest in being on the governance committee, which, again, a reminder, this is the committee that's just going to explore the process should the town decide to go from a 3-member to a 5-member select board. So I'll make that motion to appoint Larry to that committee.
And I'll second that motion. And any discussion?
Nope.
And thank you for Larry for stepping up. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Okay, so I
Oh.
guess you,
I don't know if you want to.
yes.
I just would, if I could ask a couple of questions, as being one of the members of that committee. Just to clarify a couple things, because and I had a meeting with Marlene the other day just to sort of sit down and listen to a couple things
Okay,
and figure.
basically on the committee, I saw two objectives, okay? And one objective was to trying to find out if this is a good thing for the town, the pros and cons. And the other objective was something that Brian had brought up. He wanted to know if the town decided to go with this, what the process would be. I believe that's what, but I don't want to speak for you.
No, well, Ed, I don't believe the first statement. When we were at town meeting, we said, is the town interested in finding out the process of going from a 3-member to a 5-member board? That's it. This committee is not charged to give us their opinion as a committee whether we should or shouldn't go to a 5-member board. That's up to town meeting.
Well,
This committee is simply to find out what's the process from going from 3 to 5 members. How does the election happen? How do 1 year, 2 year, 3 year
But when you brought this up originally for me to vote, I publicly stated part of the reason I was voting for it to let the town decide, but also to have an understanding of if it was a good thing for the town. I mean, I don't see how we can go in front of the town and say, well, this is the process to change it, when they only voted to review it. I don't think we really voted to.
I think we're saying the same thing, actually. We want this committee to find out what would it take to go from a 3-member to a 5-member board. We're not saying we're going to go from a 3-member to 5-member board. That's still up to town meeting. The town meeting, at the last town meeting, got the approval, overwhelmingly, by the way, to investigate what would it take to go from a 3-member to a 5-member board. When this committee comes back with that information, then the town's going to say, yeah, forget it, or that sounds reasonable, we'll move forward.
But shouldn't the town know whether it's going to benefit us
Yeah.
by going 3 to 5?
Yeah, that's what the results of what this committee's
I
going to do.
mean, if it's good or bad, are we saying the same thing, or you're
I think,
confused?
I
I'm
believe we
looking,
are.
that's why I'm asking the question, because I'm looking for clarity. I heard what Brian said at town meeting. I heard what was said at the meetings that you guys have had previous to this to look to set this group up. And yet, Ed, you and I had an exchange about what this committee was about, and I think from what I've interpreted, you're saying more than what Brian's thinking. When I heard Brian, initially it was like, what's the steps? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, end of discussion. That you can find with a 10-minute Google search. Okay?
Absolutely.
So that answer could be given tonight as to what it takes, okay? The committee could get together, say, yep, this is it, file a report and say, here it is.
And then I would say, David, excuse me,
yeah,
I don't mean to
please,
interrupt.
yeah.
And then at that point, we would bring that information to town meeting and say, here's what it would take.
Right. Now, Ed, what I hear you saying is, and what I've heard other people say is, should we be interviewing people, such as current select board members, past select board members, town residents, people who work in the town hall, people from other towns who might have gone from a 3-member to a 5-member or a 5-member to a 3-member, and come back with information that's as to what's happened in other places. Also, in some of my initial personal research about this to try to get going, I found a report that help me, Marlene, if I forget, the Division of Local Services, which is part of the Department of Revenue.
Correct.
I found a report from the town of Duxbury that they recently went through this whole process. And the Division of Local Services, it's very obvious, went to the town, did a whole report, interviewed a whole bunch of people, came up with all this stuff. It's this long, 20-something page report that they put together with statistical information, and they interviewed a bunch of different people and that kind of stuff. And then presented that to the Board of Selectmen, as here's what it would take, here's what it is, and in that report is that one paragraph that says this is how you do it. That, okay, but there's all sorts of other information in there. I haven't read it cover to cover. I haven't, brought a lot of that information into me, but I have some stuff put aside to bring forward with our committee to sort of look at that. But I didn't know if that was something that the board wanted to consider, and I don't know, Marlene and I talked about it the other day. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to talk to anybody yet.
I haven't.
At their, but, and I don't know if that's a free service or if it's something you have to pay for. I know nothing about it, but I'm not saying that this committee shouldn't exist or that we shouldn't do this work, but that's another avenue I think that we could use to possibly try to answer all these questions that people might have.
I think part of it people will have, if you go to town meeting and say, this is what you got to do to go to 3 to 5 without any reason behind doing it, I think that's going to cause more confusion for people. I mean, if it's a good idea, well, we got to be able to show it's a good idea. If it's a bad idea, then we show that too. I mean, but I guess I'd have to reread how that article was presented, because if the article is presented only giving you the charge to go 3 to 5, then there's nothing I can do, and I misunderstood what we're going to put out there. So,
and I also sort of believe in either case, whether we're doing something smaller or something a little bit bigger. I personally want to, and it'll be my goal as part of the committee, that personal beliefs will be left out of it. It's just going to be, here are some possible pros to doing it. Maybe here are some possible cons to doing it. Here's what it would cost. This is how long it would take. Some simple stuff like that. I think is really, I think what you guys are looking for. I believe that's what I'm trying to get into my own head, just so that when we start to meet, that we'll have some clear objectives.
That was absolutely the intention, and that was, if I remember correctly, that was the conversation on town meeting floor, when it was kind of like, well, why are you asking this?
Yeah.
And I made the case for, then the biggest one being, with a 3-member board, you can never have a conversation with a fellow member without it being considered a violation of the open meeting law. The planning board, the conservation commission, the school committee, everybody, the rec committee, they all have 5 members. And part of that is so that you can have conversations. If we had a 5-member board and we had to look into something like this, 2 of the members could work together to do something. We do that on the school committee all the time. We call it a task force rather than a subcommittee, because we're not violating by having a quorum. So, I mean, that for me was the biggest reason to even have brought it forward, along with my colleagues, to town meeting. And that was the reasoning I gave. That's the reasoning I believe. I certainly don't have a problem with some pros and cons. I don't expect whatever you guys come back with to be the way we are necessarily moving forward. I expect with whatever you guys come back with to be the topic of conversation at the next town meeting, to say, okay, we get it. Here's some pros, here's some cons, and here's what you get, and here's what you give up by going from 3 to 5. And then town meeting will vote at that point, up or down. And what on top of that is, if they vote up, then what's the next step? That is what this was really, is there then got to be a change at the State House? Does there have to be a separate vote at the ballot box? Those are the things I was hoping.
It would take some time.
Yes.
To get that to move in that direction. I
Sure.
don't know if it would take a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever
Right.
it is.
Right.
Depending on
There's a process.
how quickly certain parts of our government work.
Sure, right.
And when elections would be and that
Yes.
kind of stuff, as far as town elections or special elections or
Yeah.
whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's certainly not something that's going to happen overnight, no matter
Whatever we,
what.
right, absolutely. And I think I speak for Ed and Cindy. The goal is to have the committee, the governance committee, do some of that research. But we don't expect you to have it to us tomorrow or anything. And if December doesn't seem likely, that's fine, because we're really not going to be able to discuss it until a town meeting, as far as a vote goes.
Right.
But it would be nice to have the conversations going over the next few months. So that's how I see it. And I do think that Ed and I are sort of saying the same thing. We're just saying it in a different way. But, again, I don't want to speak for Ed, but that was my intention. But, but I understand you need clarification,
Asking
David.
so that
I absolutely get it.
Going
We're-
in the right direction.
We're glad you're here, one of the original founding members of the governance committee, and you're here to talk about it, so we appreciate that.
So which report, is that a public document that we could get a hold of that one town?
Oh, yeah, I mean, if I simply Googled.
Online.
How do you go from 3 members to 5 members, Board of Selectmen or something like that, and it was on the first page. I mean, I have it saved, I could email it to you if you wanted me to.
And that was a town of?
Duxbury, which is a town down in the southeastern Mass, right on the shore. It's a very wealthy community. They are still, I think, one of the few that are still towns and not cities in that area down there.
Do you know what
So-
they ultimately did? Did they stay at
Like I
3?
said, I haven't
Oh, you finished the whole
finalized
thing.
the whole thing. They
Okay.
give a lot of statistical information in there, like, they probably looked at all the towns that surround there, and it showed whether they had 5 members or
Sure.
3 members and that kind of stuff. There's a few parameters in there that they looked at, as far as, I think one of the things that sticks out to me is that if you're a town of 15,000 or more, the sort of general guideline is you should have 5 members. If you're less than 3 members, probably suffices. But, I think there's a lot of towns around here that are small like us that have 5-member committees also, just looking. We got that thing in the Gazette yesterday.
Right.
That outlines all the towns and all the different things, and I happened to be fingering through that and looking how many towns, small, had 5-member boards of selectmen actually, and there are a number of them that are not dissimilar to Hatfield.
Right.
Because I think of some reasons like you outlined. I mean, there's other reasons that people say that 5 members, the meetings drag on because there's too many voices to be heard and that kind of stuff. But I think in those cases, I think it's a matter of the chair keeping
Keep it moving.
the meeting moving, keeping the people, whether they're select board members or audience members, from slowing the meetings down and just letting the board conduct their business and
Right.
get it done.
Right.
So,
All right, it'll be interesting, because I know this topic has come up a few times over the years.
yes, it has.
But it never passed town meeting before.
It's,
So-
it's
so
no
I'm
different.
not-
It's no different than the collector treasurer thing that we've been fighting
Absolutely.
for years. I was reading. Marlene gave me a copy of the 2011 report from the Division of Local Services on the financial management that they prepared for the town, and I'm reading through that, and I'm wondering, that
Yeah.
7 years ago they made some recommendations of things that we still haven't, I don't believe, followed through on the management, on the fiscal management side of things. But I know none of you were here at that
Right.
point. But if you haven't read that report, you guys, that would be a good one to read,
Yeah.
to see where you're at, as far as with all the stuff that's going on. Because it is an interest, it's not that long, you can probably do it in an hour.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I've had the pleasure, but
But thank you, and Marlene, and hopefully we're gonna get together and get a meeting posted for next week, or at least by the beginning of the following week, and get rolling here on this.
great.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Okay, the next topic would be bonfire permit request from the fire department. I do have a request from the fire chief to the members of the select board in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 111, Section 142.8. I ask that you permit one ceremonial bonfire to the Hatfield Firefighters Association. As in the past, the fire department has a safety and fire control plan for the bonfire. I will be in attendance for the purpose of supervising the fire department operations of the fire in accordance with Mass General Laws, which is part of the once-a-year celebration. So I'll make a motion that we grant the permit.
A second.
Motion made, motion second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, so motion carries. Next, we have a Berkshire Gas moratorium update, and to basically summarize the report, it says the moratorium is going to continue, and basically their findings are for some of their options, they claim it's too expensive for them to do their options, and they don't want to pass that cost on to the people that are paying for gas. So I'm not sure how this gets resolved down the road, or I'm just letting you know that the moratorium for Berkshire Gas will continue, and I don't know if you want to make any comments.
No, I mean, I think everybody's been reading about it in the newspaper for a couple years now, and it's tough on new homes and businesses that want to expand or move into,
If they haven't
Into
already,
gas.
Berkshire Gas will be making a public release.
yeah.
It's just too bad for any, developers,
Yeah,
people interested in, switching to gas.
well, that's what we were hoping to do a couple years ago, right, Marlene, with at the library, we're going to switch to a
Right.
gas furnace.
That's right,
Yes.
and we weren't able to
But
do
we weren't,
that.
we weren't able to take advantage of a grant we were getting for the equipment because there was a moratorium on the gas
That's
for
right.
that equipment,
And
so.
I met with Mr. Christopher Farrell and Karen Zink from Berkshire Gas last week and explained to them that that was something, we attempted to do, and we were not successful for that reason. And the other thing I mentioned to Mr. Farrell is that, we, the town, are looking to expand our water and sewer service out on Route 5 and 10. And we know of developers who would like to develop property along that route. And it certainly would be nice if those developers or
Had access if they
business
wanted.
owners would like to hook into natural gas. Yeah.
I don't know if this will end up with the political, right, at the State House, probably.
Well, they actually had a meeting with Secretary Jay Ash, of
Okay.
Economic Development, Department of Economic Development, and because they viewed this as, a need under economic development, and Mr. Ash had stated at that meeting that he hasn't heard from any of the communities within Berkshire Gas region that, they're interested in having additional services. So certainly that's something we could communicate to Mr. Ash if the board so chooses to.
Well, if the residents in town, I guess, contacted us that they had concerns, then we could pass that on, I suppose.
Yeah, or they could go to the, their state rep or state senator, I mean, or through us, but,
Absolutely.
those folks will have the more juice than we will probably, unless we provide a whole list by a certain date or something.
Because we did miss out on that, some of the money from that energy grant by not having it.
Yeah, thousands, actually, if I'm not mistaken, so.
Okay. Anything else on this topic? I guess that should be it. Topic 5, water sewer reading billing. They will be currently reading meters and billing in October, and to my understanding, it's all done from outside. Is that correct?
It is.
So there should be no need for anybody to enter your premises, because I think it's all microwave, radio waves, and they shoot the things. Topic 6, the new vehicles update on the police cruisers. They should be in around the end of September. That's the information, or possibly October, I guess. Topic 7, Cindy's not here to update on the FRTA bus stop, but what it's sort of saying is FRTA, in order to have a bus stop, they're requiring and ADA provisions, they're requiring the town to design the layout for the shelter, and that should be completed by the town, but we don't have any.
Right, that's an expense the town will have to incur
We have no
They-
cost, possible cost of what it might cost us or how to fund it yet,
Not
right?
at this time. Phil actually was going to meet with Mass DOT representative for this area, and to see if Mass DOT is anticipating any projects for 5 and 10 in the
Okay.
future. And so that maybe during that time. that
Roll
would-
this in to be part of that.
Correct.
Makes
However,
sense.
there is also a Complete Streets grant application process that I'm looking into. The next round is in May for that grant application. So Phil and I have talked about that as well.
Okay.
And this project would be perfect under that grant.
Okay, so we'll just wait on that until we get more information and possibly a grant.
FRTA has been allowed or permitted to have the sign installed. They just don't have the manpower. So the DPW director is taking care of having the sign installed.
Okay.
Trying to put one on each side, north and southbound lanes.
Thank you.
Okay, topic 8, Smith Academy Park Phase 2 update. There was a meeting on September 13th, and I believe, Marlene, you attended, right?
I did attend that meeting as well. That was an informational meeting with residents, anybody who's interested in attending. And that was to look at the different options, at this time. Doesn't mean that, those options for the pavilion won't change. We're not locked into selecting one of those 3. Actually, the architect welcomed the comments from the people that were in attendance, and people would like to see something a little more traditional. The architect pointed out that the frame of the pavilions, the 3 designs, actually are, the intent is to replicate the roof, the framing of the original Smith Academy. And if you look at pictures, photos of Smith Academy, that's exactly what she did. However, people are looking for something a little more softer.
As far as the roofing.
The roofing,
part
yeah.
of it goes.
Sort of round the roof down. There were
Fewer
people that
angles.
expressed interest in a gazebo. And the intent for it to be open is so that it's accessible for anybody.
Sure.
And if you want to hold events or craft fair, small craft fair on the platform there. So anyway, she's going to go back, and that same evening she did propose something. Open Space is going to meet with the architect, and hopefully they'll be back soon.
So she's taken everybody's concerns, and
Yeah.
now she's going to go back, redraw it, and come back and have another sketch night, right?
Yes.
So, perfect. IT RFP update.
So the RFP has been issued, and a number of people are requesting the specifications. The due date is October 9th, and at that time, I will review the proposals and then discuss them with the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. Topic 11, Auditors FY17 Management Letter. This will be to approve the draft.
Right, this was actually on a previous agenda, and there were some questions, a question, I should say, not so much a question, regarding, trying to look at the page that there was a section that the board had questioned regarding the training for the accountant. And that was reworded, and if the board is comfortable with that, I will notify the auditor and he will finalize the report. Yeah, that's on page 4.
Right.
So page 4, second paragraph. So that just clarifies it, that there has been some training.
The last sentence in the second paragraph, however, is there wasn't necessarily a laid out, or there isn't a laid out, or hadn't been a laid out process for, so,
I think, yes, that's a suggestion or recommendation.
okay.
They believe the previous letter had stated that training
Yeah,
had not been
yeah,
made
correct,
available.
which was not correct.
Right.
All right,
Right.
I'm fine with this,
Okay.
personally. I don't know how Ed feels.
I'm fine with it. We changed it, and
Well, it's more, I would say it's
board
more
just needs to-
accurate. It's more, yeah. Yeah, okay,
You've accepted that, then
Yeah.
he will finalize that.
okay.
Okay.
so I'll make a motion to approve this.
Yep.
Any discussion?
No, I'll second it.
Okay. Motion made, motion seconded, motion carries, okay.
Were we doing this tonight, or were we holding off on that? Because we skipped over it.
Oh, it skipped over, no, as far as yeah.
Number 9, it's kind of crunched in there.
Yes, that's,
Okay.
topic 9, we'll go to that. I held it for last, just in case.
So I've, keeping in sequence of the policies of the HR manual section, section 13 is very, very small section, so I added section 14, and then the chair had requested that the board take up town vehicles, which 21.4 is a subsection of section 21.
Well, I have one question, when we're talking vehicles. I originally had asked the departments to have everybody read the policy in reference to use of the vehicles. Did that happen?
I'd have to look back. I don't believe we've received a response from every employee.
Okay. Because I think everybody should know what the policy is in reference to vehicles if they're using town vehicles.
Okay.
So I guess if you could follow that up, that would be, and if they haven't, they should read it.
And sign off on it.
Correct.
And sign off on it.
Right,
That's
we signed
we
off
we
on
did, we have received
Yeah.
some receipts, but,
So my suggestion would be go back to the department head and say, here's the people that did not sign off on this yet. Have they read it? And if have not, have them read it. And we
Right.
want we want the sign off by the end of next week.
Okay.
I mean, I think we need to give them a deadline. If you don't sign off that you've read it and understand the policy, then you're not going to have access to the vehicle. I mean, it's that simple.
was there any particular numbers in that section that you wanted to review or discuss under the vehicle policy?
And none for me. I agree with Ed. I mean, we asked that a couple months ago, if I'm not mistaken, or a month ago. I guess it would be any policy that has to do with town property that any town employees have access to. You just want to make sure so nobody can come back and say, I didn't know that that's what the process was, or that's what the policy. That's all this is. It's not meant to be extra work. It's just to make sure we're all on the same wavelength is what the expectation is and how you go about following through on the process. I mean, it seems pretty
And
easy
the
to me.
other important thing is in case somebody does do something afterwards with a vehicle, they can't come back and say, well, I didn't know that was the policy, I
Right.
mean,
Right, exactly.
everybody and all
Covers
new
everybody.
employees should also read the policy, so those that will be, especially those that are using vehicles, so.
Yep.
Section 13 and 14, I have made some edits or recommendations. And, we were also talking about, and I'm just thinking regarding contract employees, department heads, and my conversation with Attorney Mullen's office regarding employees, contractor department heads, salary employees. I don't know if you want to, if you'd like to consider adding a clause, or that this will be applied to department heads.
Well, I mean, we're sort of updating it, and you've already talked with legal on what should be in there, so I don't. And we already discussed the 20 hours, because we did some research to see if the town was required to do benefits if somebody worked at least 20 hours or more, right? So.
Right.
And they are. And we are.
Right. That's why
Yeah.
it's been worded.
Yep. I'm fine with all this.
Okay.
Thank you for going through the process, Marlene.
You're welcome. Okay, so,
So I'll make a motion to approve or accept Section 13 with the changes, Section 14 with the changes, and I'll also approve Section 21 where there were no changes, which had to do with the vehicle
okay.
I'll second the
and
motion.
town property, okay.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right. So,
So, Mr. Chairman, it looks like this is the end of the posted until we meet with finance. But, we still have that job description that we've been sort of on hold for people to come back and offer their opinion, and I haven't heard or seen anything since we had this conversation a month ago.
well, I was contacted this week they had a meeting this week.
They who?
and The Emergency Management Committee.
Okay.
And they had a meeting, and their recommendation is no changes to the job description.
So the Emergency Management Committee of appointed residents does not want to change to the job description for Emergency Management Director. And those changes were brought forth by the police chief and the fire chief on behalf of, the two chiefs that are the emergency people for police, fire, and ambulance. So I'm going to make a motion right now that we approve the job description as presented by the chiefs of police and the chief of fire. We appreciate the Emergency Management Committee's input, but this is really the plan of attack should we ever have a problem, and the reporting structure that the Emergency Management Committee wanted to be through the fire chief. I'm going to make that motion that we approve that job description tonight. So, and along that, I would say, Ed, so that the candidate can read what the job description is and know exactly what the expectations are and decide if it is or isn't something that they want to do going forward. So I think we need to move forward. This has been going on for 4 months, and I think the chiefs would want some sort of stability with a long-term appointment to that position. So there's my motion.
I want to think about your motion because, I mean, I don't even know why, well,
We remember that this all got brought, I repeated myself, and I'm sick of talking about it, I'm sure the residents are sick of hearing it, but this all was brought about because the Emergency Management Committee wanted to move that position under the Board of Selectmen.
oh, I know the history of it. It's been.
Well, so that's what prompted, well, if we're going to do that, then we need to know, we need to have a job description and an expectation of whoever that, whoever's in that position. And then they said, oh, wait, we can't do that because you can't have a board member, you can't have a board appoint a fellow board member, regardless of who it is, which, I mean, I get it, that makes sense. So they wanted to leave it where it is. But the door to making sure that on a go-forward basis, the job description was brought up to date, that was the premise for all this. And
Well, I'm going to ask you a question. If we move on your motion,
Yeah.
are you ready to do a year appointment to the present emergency management director?
I'm not sure that that's really a proper question to ask in a meeting. You need to, I mean, I guess there's one way to find out. Let me just remind you that position expires next week.
Well,
So,
I'm just saying if we're going to, what I'm asking on that, the reason I was asking that, are you ready to?
I know why, Ed, but we can't
move
really have that kind of a
to-
conversation. I
to
mean,
take- To take, are we ready to deal with everything? I guess maybe that's what I should put the question.
I would like to have us move forward, make a long-term appointment to the emergency management director after they have a chance to decide whether they will or will not. And we went over this, and I spelled it all out on TV. There's like 5 changes. It's about reporting. That's how I want to move forward, if you can read between the lines.
Well, actually, if you want to change the job description, I guess that's fine, because I don't think it affects anything. It just adds.
It doesn't.
It just adds a
It
few
clarifies.
things.
I think what it does is it takes a lot of assumptions
All right.
and spells them out.
Okay, I'll second your motion and move forward with what the fire chief and the police chief decided for the job description.
Okay.
So motion made, motion seconded.
All those in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Next thing, since we're talking EMD,
Yep.
can we make a motion on the present EMD to make that a one-year appointment, or do you need more time to figure out what you want to do?
I just need to hear the motion.
Okay, I'll make a motion to appoint Cindy Doty, Emergency Management Director for the next year. That's what we need, a year appointment, is that what it
Yeah,
is?
till the end of June
Yes.
2019. I'll second that.
Okay, motion made, motion second. That-
Under discussion.
Under discussion.
So I think in fairness to the Emergency Management Director and the Emergency Management Committee, they just need to be notified that on a go-forward basis, here's the process, which really hasn't changed anything. So Cindy would need to agree to that, or, like any appointment, right? You want to know what you're being appointed to and what the expectations are, and the Emergency Management Committee, just needs to know that we moved forward with the recommendation of the chiefs.
Okay.
That's all I wanted to say under discussion, that's all. Because if something changes and that's not what she wants to do, then we've got to post, the position, so.
All right, fine.
So the appointment is for 1 year, provided the EMD is willing to accept the job description changes?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's only fair to the Emergency Management Director. I mean,
Okay.
Well, on one hand, I don't think it was fair to pick at one person and change their job description, but anyways, we'll move on with this. And
it's a lot of money we paid.
we gotta vote on your description, and we have to vote
Yeah.
to see what we're gonna do with EMD, because this is our last meeting this month. and-
Right.
Okay,
Yep.
so motion made, motion seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, motion carries. We're going to break for now until we meet with the Finance Committee at 6:30. Okay, we're back with our continuation of the meeting. The Finance Committee is going to be meeting with Justin Cole from Bay State, but I just want to clarify a few things for the audience. First is the way the meeting is going to be conducted tonight is the Finance Board is first going to be asking the questions to Justin, because he's been sent a bunch of questions. And then after the Finance Committee's done and everybody else is done, then we'll open it to the audience. So I'm not taking any questions from the audience or anything until after the Finance Committee has the opportunity to ask the questions, because some of the questions I think the audience might have is some stuff that might be answered. So that's how we're going to run this. So don't raise your hands back there or anything, or you'll get your chance afterwards. So Justin Cole's here from Bay State. Thank you, Justin, for being with us. And I'm going to turn this over to the financial chair, Mr. Williams.
Thank you. But I guess I would clarify, I look at this as the financial team that we're meeting with Justin together with the select board on that. And I did get a chance to sit down with Marlene yesterday, and we kind of talked about some questions, and I'm sure you guys have more questions, but I thought we would start, give us a little timeline. So, our first question, Justin, and you already know what the question is how is fiscal year 2018 going? How's the reconciliation and closure? And then, are there any anticipated problems, resolutions, and then how are we doing kind of hitting our target dates?
Okay. So we started the FY18 reconciliation the 1st of July. So thus far, it breaks down into a few different pieces. So we have to do a reconciliation of the assessor's office, the collector's office, and then the accountant's office, right? So all of that information flows back through the accountant. How we're handling it right now is we're tackling it one task at a time. So the first task was the assessor's office. So the assessor's office includes all the committed taxes that are put together, all the abatements, so motor vehicle, CPA, real estate, personal property. The assessor's office reconciliation in terms of what they've committed or abated through the Board of Assessors, that was completed about the third week in July for the entirety of FY18. So that
For the whole year?
for the whole year. So
Right.
that part is already taken care of. To be honest, that's one of the easier ones to do, right? So I mean, while it is a milestone, it is not necessarily the biggest milestone, but it is certainly something.
Yeah.
So the assessor's office is done. Where we are right now is now working with the treasurer collector's office, so that if you break it up into two pieces, so that the treasurer and the collector. So the treasurer's office we have been working to reconcile the information that is been received by the accounting office. So the town accountant has cash receipts that he received from the prior treasurer for the entirety of FY18. As has been covered in the FY17 management letter and the FY17 audit, and is fairly well known, is that though that information is not known for its accuracy or completeness. We have a member of our team who is going through in conjunction with the treasurer's office now to review bank statements, transaction activities, identify anything that is missing. So on the accountant side, all of FY18 is missing from the ledger, so there are no cash receipts booked at all for the accounting department. So we're basically starting from scratch. Because we're starting from nothing, we're not necessarily reconciling this portion of it, we're just building it for the first time. Given that it's a year plus later at this point, that is a time-consuming task. So as it stands right now, we've completely rebuilt July 2017. Most of August 2017 is complete. About half of September 2017 is complete, and we're just continuing forward.
We're talking about the
accountant's portion, right?
But the collector treasurer part we have that information.
Correct. The treasurer collector have been working since the late spring
Right.
to do that same exercise, right?
Okay.
And so, where the departments, the financial departments fit together is, each one of the departments has to do something, and it all ends at accounting, right? So the treasurer collector's office got a, say, 60-day head start on that, right, and has made it all the way through FY18.
Well, that's great.
They had a few very minor reconciling items, of which we've uncovered a few of them in the work that we've already done. So we're hopeful that by the time we rebook all the way through June 2018, that the few remaining items, which to my knowledge is, I feel like less than $1,000 at this point that we're looking for, we'll hopefully identify whatever the remaining items are. At this point, we're anticipating it's probably 4 to 5 weeks of time to continue the research and the booking of those things. We're hopeful that
To complete the whole year,
for just this piece of it, yes, to
Right.
complete the whole year.
to get the entries in.
Correct. It's a time-consuming process. It requires a tremendous amount of backup and support that the Treasurer Collector's Office has been very gracious in getting us the information that we need to get those items booked. We don't anticipate any problems, and honestly, we anticipate that as the fiscal year goes on, it should start to pick up speed a little bit further. You know, when we get to the mid to late spring area for FY18, you know, we anticipate that will go very quickly at that point. You know, there was a change of, you know, procedures and staffing within the office that changed how that information was being handled. So we're cautiously optimistic for that. The last and most time-consuming piece is the rebooking of all the expenditure side of the house. So this entails a review of all the payrolls and all the accounts payable and expenses that the town processed in FY18. While it's the area that we have the least amount of concern in terms of things missing, again, we've already noted that there are quite a few things missing, right? So there are expenses that cleared the bank that were not actually recorded on the general ledger. While we're catching it, it's great, but again, these are some items that were highlighted in the FY17 audit, was that there's a mismatch between, you know, expenses that were leaving the bank and the treasurer's office via the treasurer's records versus what the town accountant recorded as being an expense. So these are very specifically related to debt transactions. So the town has outstanding debt. A lot of those debt items they're not processed via a standard check. They're either auto-drafted or wired directly from the bank. Because of that, the payment is able to be made without the town accountant actually placing it on a warrant for payment, like any other bill would be. And so in reconciling July and August of 2017, all the debt payments are wrong, right? So they're correct on the treasurer's side, they're incorrect on the accountant's side, right? So that right there is a $100,000 issue on its own, right? So while we feel, generally speaking, that 95% of the expense transactions should be fine and they're going to be rebooked as they originally rebooked, we still have to take the care to go through every single one of them because we have to make sure they're all there. So,
They're about how many per month?
so I mean, I can tell you what it is for the year. It's just short of 11,000 transactions for the year. So, I mean, call it in a good day, they're about a minute each, right?
No.
So it's a fair amount of work, right? So
And
when we
you're
think-
rebooking this to the new
Correct.
accounting system.
Correct. Right. So we're rebooking everything from scratch. The point of all of this rebooking and not just reconciling and fixing of what is there is that there are a lot of erroneous entries that create background noise in the system that you already have, right? So there's bookings and rebookings and corrections on corrections, and there's a lot of white noise that makes this already difficult project even more difficult. So for us, while it is exponentially more time consuming to rebook all of these things by hand, it may not actually take much longer than it would to just try to reconcile it in place.
And it'll be correct on a go-forward basis.
Right.
I mean,
It'll be
that's
correct.
a little bit more time now and upfront, but moving forward, it's no more of what we've been
Right.
living.
The conversation that we've had with the town's auditors, Roselia and Clark,
Yeah.
goes a little something like FY17, they came in, they did the audit, and it's done. For better or for worse, those are the financial results of the town for FY17. We will take those, we will rebook FY18 correctly, and then hopefully that puts the issues of the past behind us, right? And now we're just looking 1 year at a time moving forward. I mean, there's a substantial, I don't want to downplay the difficult research that's involved in some of these things. Paying bills sounds fairly straightforward until you get to the part where it's pay this bill out of this special article that may or may not have money in it for the last couple of years, right? So there's a fair amount of historical research that needs to be done. Again, the town clerk has been great in getting us information regarding prior town meeting warrants and town meeting actions and And all of the staff at Town Hall has been very helpful in helping us with some institutional knowledge of, where some of these things have been. With all of that said, looking forward, I believe the auditors are scheduled for the first or second week of December, right? So we're shooting for being done by the 1st of December. We have some concerns if we run into anything. The timeline assumes that it will not go smoothly, but it also assumes that there's nothing critically damning in there either, right? So kind of middle of the road. We do feel relatively confident that if we can get the cash receipt side completed, the treasurer collector cash receipt, the entire side of the house that is not everything except for expenditures, that at the very, very least, the auditors can come in. That is a lot of the heavy lifting, is that part of it. And push worst case scenario, you have warrants. They represent what happened, whether that is right or wrong. They do represent what actually did happen. And so that information does exist. So if there's a slight overlap at the end, at least they can come in and start working on something. I think part of the problem in terms, again, in looking historically has been that they have not been able to come in and look at anything because there's been no one thing that was at least done, right? And so we're approaching this fairly systematically. There's an order of operations from it. Like if you think about the financial flow, you pick the treasurer collector's office, right? It starts at the assessors and the board of assessors. It goes to the collector does it. It goes to the treasurer. It goes to the accountant, right? So we're rebooking it in that same order that the original transaction flow would happen, so that there are pieces of this that step through the process correctly, right? So again, overall, we're feeling fairly hopeful. It's going relatively smoothly at this point, or at least it's not going worse than we thought it would, however you want to look at it.
Justin?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it a fair assumption that once you go through the rather tedious process of getting everything booked, that the reconciliation should be fairly straightforward?
Yes. So we're building pieces of the reconciliation as we go.
As you go, okay.
Basically the way it works is we've set up 12 months of reconciliation. As we finish each of these pieces, they're translated to the reconciliation. So theoretically, when we get to the end of the line, all the information's in there, and it should just be a matter of tweaking it and adjusting straight down the line.
Okay.
While rebooking everything from scratch is the better way to do it, you don't know until you get to the end if there's actually anything missing, right? So, when I say, the assessor's part of it's done, that part of it we can successfully say is done because, we've already compared it to the assessor's records and there's nothing missing. Mm-hmm. But the success on this really predicates on we have to be able to compare the information that we've been given with something else. Mm-hmm. To ensure that it's correct, right? That's the whole principle of the reconciliation part. So, revenues, for example, this is why we're building alongside the treasurer collector's office our own cash proof that ties to the bank statements so that we know that when we post a month's worth of cash receipts, that's all of them, right? And that there's not a question about whether there's a missing paper or not. Again, looking back in FY17, we had a lot of conversations here with the town accountant about a month being booked, and then there was this leftover piece that nobody knew what to do with, that unapplied revenue that we talked about time and time again, lists and lists of items that, they hit the bank, but nobody could put their hands on a piece of paper for it, right? What we're trying to
This is on the revenue side.
On the revenue side, yes. What we're trying to avoid in the rebooking process is having that list of dangling transactions at the end that don't have a home, right? So we're trying to identify everything first, reconcile it with the bank statement, and then book last so that we know that everything's there.
So, how will all this affect the ability to set a tax rate? So, will all this need to be completed? Will the audit need to be done in order to set a tax rate?
So the most important component of going into the tax rate is that we need to get a handle on your revenues, and we need to get a handle on your ending financial position for FY18. So, the tax rate is predicated, what your tax rate is it has a lot of moving parts, but it's not overly complicated, right? So we need to know how you guys actually did in benchmarking in your revenues, right? So when we helped the town set their tax rate for FY18, we estimated on the conservative side because there were not sufficient FY17 records to set it in the normal process. We're hopeful based on some of the information that the Treasurer's Office has provided and what we've seen in the reconciliation so far that it appears that our conservative estimates were conservative enough, right? So there should be a good financial ending position for the town in terms of overall financial stability, right? I mean, it wasn't so overly conservative that you're going to get $1 million worth of free cash out of it, right?
Right.
It's financially conservative that you ended in the black by some amount of money. You guys will not require, as far as I know at least, that the DOR is not going to require you to have the audit completed to set the tax rate. You will have to have the audit completed to get your free cash, right? So it'll be the same
Absolutely, right.
deal as last year where
Right.
not until at least draft financials are ready
Right.
will they entertain your free cash.
Okay.
Based on this timeline that we've been talking about here, basically, trying to be substantially done with this by December, right? There should be no problem setting your tax rate. So last year, again, we started looking at your tax rate the last couple of days in November.
We were thinking the middle of November.
Right, so it'll
Right.
likely be closer to the end of November, the beginning of December, right? So, I mean, the assessor's office, there's nothing that precludes the assessor's office for getting their part of it done, right?
Right.
So really, it can be prepped, the assessors can do their part, the treasurer collector can do their part, and then there is this piece at the end that's accounting related. A lot of that accounting related stuff, though, we can also fill in as we go. So when we talk about maybe end of November, beginning of December, we're not really talking about doing work on it at that point. We're talking about that's just when the button gets pushed. The other thing is that as we get into the 1st of November, we're going to loop in the Department of Revenue and start doing logic checks and things with them and start supplying them with additional information. We need to feed them information and vet out their questions as we get through November so that there are no surprises with the tax rate. If there are questions that they have, if there are additional information that they might require, we'd like to engage them like a solid month ahead of time to make sure that there are no surprises at the end. We don't want to be saying that, we're trying to get the tax rate set for the 1st of December, and then have them come back and say, well, they will require this analysis that'll take us another week or two to do, right? I mean,
Right.
if we can get out in front of it, if there's information that we can feed to the auditors ahead of time, I don't know if they have the capacity and we've not explicitly talked to them, but again, if there's information that we can get to them to start peer reviewing and checking ahead of time, we're trying to err on the side of caution in this so that when we get to this end of November, beginning of December timeframe, the tax rate, the audit, and everything can kind of just roll through. And then all things being equal, if we can make it through the audit, there's a brief pause for the holidays there at the end of December, and then we're hoping that your free cash, your audit and your free cash go in for early January, after we clear the holidays.
That'd be great. And then Schedule A is somewhere in the middle, isn't that, or is that a November 1st due thing?
So it's technically due Halloween.
Halloween, okay.
But it won't be done by Halloween.
Right.
So again, that'll be another one. It'll probably be completed, in that same time frame as your free cash and your audit and all that. So they're all interrelated, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're technically due at different times throughout the fall, but the reality is they can easily be done as one larger financial process. And so that's likely what we'll do because, again, we want to submit this information to the Department of Revenue in a logical way, right? I mean, your balance sheet is supposed to tie to your Schedule A and everything is supposed to tie to your tax rate. And it's really one big process that they kind of break into smaller parts. So
Right.
going through this from a timeliness factor, we'll approach it as one financial process. And the goal would be to turn in the entire thing and file the entire thing with the state simultaneously. With that said, though, I mean, Schedule A is technically due in the fall, right? And so, we'll work with the town administrator and the board of selectmen to put together a letter to the Department of Revenue. I mean, it's
Thank you, I was just going
probably
to ask about
Yeah.
that.
right.
So
Let's
Derek,
say, you know,
Right, so
I'm already
we've been in the presence of
anticipating
the Department of
communicating
Revenue.
with-
Right. Right. So I'm sure it won't come as a surprise that you're going to, and you're not. I mean, you're not necessarily asking for an extension because the extension process doesn't happen until it's technically really late, like much later in the process. But I mean, it will serve more as an informational memo just to clarify where the town's position is, what the plan is, and then when we likely anticipate to get that filed.
I think they would appreciate, I'm sorry,
Sure,
Daryl.
just-
I know that the
Yeah.
Department of Revenue would appreciate that, and, you know, it's all about
It's in the town's best
it's all about the
interest to do
communication, and I think Mary Jane made that perfectly clear, that good or bad, whatever news coming forward, it's all about keeping them in the loop so that everyone's on board with it. So.
Plus, they can watch this show on TV.
Yeah,
so-
oh, right, I
Oh,
forgot
I'm
that
sure they are. Does anybody else have any questions
for the explanation.
about the kind of block one fiscal year 18? So the next question we came up with is, of course, while you're doing all this, which is a lot of work, you're also doing 2019 accounts payable and revenue and stuff. So can you tell us how that's going?
Yep, so we're acting as the interim town accountant right now while the town accountant is out on sick leave. We've taken up doing, as of the middle of August or so, most of the regular day-to-day functionality of the town accountant's office. So as it stands right now, FY18, we've been processing warrants, we've been processing payrolls that we received, cash receipts. So as it stands right now, July is substantially done. We'll be ready to issue reports to all boards, committees, and departments probably in the next week or two. It'll likely be near the end of September, so what we'll probably do is issue probably the entire first quarter. So that'll be some budget summaries and detail reports, and then thereafter we'll be on a normal cycle, which will probably be bi-weekly.
Right.
Going forward.
Excuse me, and that's for 2019, right?
2019,
Okay.
right.
2019, and that's the expense side, or will that be both expense and revenue
So
side?
expenses we can issue on a bi-weekly basis. Revenues, for the time being, will be monthly.
Okay,
will be monthly.
but that'll be good. I mean, revenue reports, we've not seen ever, so
Right.
it'll be nice to have those.
Expense reports can be issued in a relatively short period after the last transaction for the biweekly cycle, right? So if it's, if it's a payroll week, it'll be, delayed a little bit. If the last warrant of the month falls on a particular day, it'll be delayed a couple of days. Revenues, they'll be done monthly, but on a slight delay as they're balanced and done, right? So if we get the last receipts, today, by the time it gets posted, we balance, we reconcile with the treasurer's office, maybe it's 2 weeks later. So revenue, reasonably, you could expect, for the month, halfway through the next month, right? So it'll be on on average a 2-week delay or something on the revenues, and then again, expenses roll pretty quickly once the first set of reports are done. The reports on the expense side flow pretty regularly after that.
Great, that will be terrific. And now, some of the reconciliation, is it more difficult to do 19 because you haven't really technically finished 18 with some of that? Does that present some challenges for 19?
So there are a number of challenges with 19 because there is no 18, right? So for example, we receive requests for people to pay bills out of special articles that go back a few years ago, right? And so
Right.
one of the things that happens is, people just usually write like prior town meeting article, right? So we have to find what it is.
Right.
We have to try to reasonably establish if it actually has any money on it, right? So, again, going back to the FY17 audit, right, and your special town meeting last January, there's a number of these capital projects and special articles and things like that where, the balance on the book, as far as the books is concerned, says that there's no money in it, right? And so while the town accountant did rectify a number of those and town meeting funded several other of those, there's a fair amount of research, again, that has to happen when we have one of these bills, right? So under, the best case scenario when everything's caught up, like this is pretty easy. We go to the ledger, we look at this article, either it has money or it doesn't, and we move forward. Now it looks a little bit something like we get this bill and we do a 3-year reconstruction of revenues and expenses and funding sources.
Right.
And then maybe we still don't have a clear answer at the end of that. So, I mean, there have been a number of challenges in getting FY19 transactions done. I mean, another example is there's a fair amount of state reporting that happens over the summer and the early fall for a whole host of things, from the Council on Aging, the Community Preservation, to Cultural Council, and the list goes on and on and on. All of them ask for a revenue, almost all of them ask for some kind of revenue component from FY18 that we don't have, right? So expenses, again, we can reasonably get our hands around expenses that happen in FY18, but when it comes to deciding on revenues, again, unless there's a clear source document to go back to where we can say the town received this money from this entity, right, in this amount, short of that source document being out there, again, it's a constant battle to try to recalculate these things and figure out what they are on the fly, to the best of our ability, right? And I mean, in full disclosure, some of these things may wash out down the line that, what we reported to, a department or an agency or something like that, that we might have to refile an amendment later on because the answer changes, right? So, we're doing the best that we can with the FY19 stuff. I think it was a bumpy July and August getting our arms around the FY19 stuff with no FY18 data. It's still bumpy. I feel like it's getting better, but we still have a fair road ahead of us, really, until we get to January and FY18 is done, and we can breeze through just one last quick review of FY18 and FY19, as one continuous financial period. It's not until we get to then that we'll truly know that it's all right and it's all working, and we just ask for the assistance and the patience of the boards and committees and departments in this process as we continue to try to make this work.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Oh,
about
yeah,
that?
please,
So
yeah.
so when you run into one of those situations where you can't really find the source documentation, are you paying the bill and just, what are you doing?
So it really depends. It's situational, right? It really depends on what it is and what the bill is for, right? So in a lot of instances, most departments keep their own financial records in terms of, keeping track of, town meeting sources and expenses and project tracking and things like that. So a lot of these have fallen back to, taking departmental tracking and source documents and comparing them to the financial documents that we have, for reasonability, right? And so in a lot of cases, you'll have one of these, I'll just pick like a community preservation project or something like that, between the department who was responsible for spending under that, we can compare their records to the financial records on the system. And I mean, some of this comes down to if it's close enough, right? If from a reasonability standpoint, they're, worlds apart, I mean, that's a different kind of problem, right? Luckily to this point, I mean, we've been able to step back into some of these things relatively easily. Again, on the expense side, the warrants that were processed, I mean, it's almost all there, right? It's a fairly limited amount of things that weren't included in that original processing. So, we can go back to the original warrants and say, okay, well, you had this project, we see these things that went through the warrants, we can either agree or disagree on, where you think you're at on that project.
Are there any unpaid bills just sitting there because we don't know how to get them paid?
Not that I know of as of literally right now.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
There have been a fair number that have been held for, say, 1 or 2 or 3 warrant cycles. We'll say they have been paid, significantly later than the rest of them. And most bills are coming, we're getting them on Wednesday, and we're sending them back on Friday, right? So they're in our shop for a couple of days, and then they're back to you. There have been, maybe slightly more than a dozen bills or so that have sat for a few transaction cycles while we have run down some vendor information or some history or some other element in order to get them paid.
Okay.
And I believe the last exception that we had hanging out there was taken care of quite literally this morning. So as of right now, before we get the next package, there is nothing, there are no exceptions, and there's nothing being held.
Right. There's been, it's a lot of change going on. I assume the staff has working well with the system? Everyone's caught up and doing fine with how they get their bills paid and how they get their things done?
So it's worked, it seems to be working fine. Everybody's been very responsive. So the cover sheets that we use, people are including their contact information like right on the face of their invoice cover sheet. So if we do have an issue, we know who to go back to. You know, we're not hunting and pecking for the right person to talk to.
Right.
That has certainly been helpful since, I mean, we don't know a lot of people in town from our exposure here outside of, say, the financial department. So it's been very helpful having that information right on the bill schedules, and it has gone pretty well. I mean, it is a fairly big change.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the biggest problems that we've had is there still seems to be a lot of information just going to the accountant's office, and it doesn't necessarily get to us. So even though the accountant's office has a sign on the door that says it's closed for medical reasons, there still seems to be stuff going there. We've been trying to reach out to people and get things directed toward us more regularly. Again, the treasurer collector's office and the town administrator's office have been great about, directing things toward us so that we can get our hands on it and get it booked. But it's minor things, like vendors drop off like a W-9, IRS W-9 form to get something, and it may or may not get to us depending on just simply where it gets dropped off to. I mean, again, what we're looking forward to in the relatively near future, and it's really more as things calm a little bit and we continue to get our arms around things, is that we're going to start doing structured on-site time out in town hall so that we can meet department heads and introduce ourselves. We're also going to have members of our staff do some coordinated outreach type things, again with staff members to introduce them, answer questions, and kind of better acclimate them with what this process looks like.
When do you think that calming moment might come?
So I mean, I think it's really not all that far away, right? I mean, I would say it's before Halloween, honestly.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
great.
I mean, it's always going to be busy and crazy, right? But I mean, it's for us, it's the FY19. I mean, we didn't reasonably think that the town accountant would be out on medical leave for as long as he's been out, right? So, going into this, if you flash back to say last May, the conversations that we had went a little something like, the town accountant would be here covering day to day, right? And we would do FY18 and run interference on the 19 stuff, and like it would be a team effort. And so, him being out for an extended absence and us just kind of doing everything at a startup, it creates a very busy beginning of the project, right? And so now that we feel comfortable with the way the budget's structured and all your town meeting stuff and everything's booked and your account conversion is all set up, to the new software and all that. I mean, that's a lot of very busy things to happen in a very short timeline. So, again, reasonably in the next couple of weeks, leading up to, say the middle of October, end of October, it should be calmer, right? On the FY18 part of it, right? I mean, the people that are working on the FY18 part will not get any calmer for them until like January. On the FY19 part, which is really the concern for, most boards, committees, and departments, right? That the forward-facing part of that should get a lot calmer.
Do you have some of the same staff working on both 18 and 19, or is it separated?
So it's mostly separate. So there's a few dedicated people that are just working on the FY18 stuff.
Yeah.
We have people doing the transaction work for FY19, and then it's really me and another person are floating between the two, right? So there needs to be a coordinated effort between what is being identified in FY18 and what is happening today in FY19, right? So they can't exclusively be separate parties, right? But yeah, I mean, it's a divide and conquer type of situation, right? I mean, we have very different goals in terms of what has to happen for FY18 and what has to happen for FY19. I mean, I think on average we have a total of 5 different people who are doing something on either side for your account, on a daily basis, right? So, again, it's a relatively short time frame to reconstruct your entire fiscal year, start up your new fiscal year, and make sure that all the things that you haven't been doing are done, right? And to to pop out the other side in January 2019 and have all these, goals and timelines met.
Fiscal year 19, is that going to be closer to being the Massachusetts Municipal Standard Accounting? Remember,
Yeah, so it's...
so that things could get plugged into state reports more easily?
Oh, yeah, so it's dead on, right? So, I mean, theoretically speaking, at this point, after converting your chart of accounts, rebooking your 18 and doing your 19, I mean, I think, whether it's us or whoever the town accountant is, I mean, reasonably speaking, I mean, you should plan on your free cash being submitted like this time next year. Like 1 year from now, the conversation should really be, FY19 is closed, reconciled, tied out, and we're moving toward, submission of free cash.
And so our new chart of accounts will now lend itself to doing that?
Yes.
Thank you.
And so once we get to that so-called normal, then we are audited, most towns are audited in the fall, when their books are closed.
Yeah. I mean, usually your auditors come out for site visits twice, right? So the first time is more about compliance testing, usually, and AP testing, things like that, and they come back like later in the fall to do, financials, drafting of financial statements, and to finish everything off. So, again, for a community your size, if everything goes the way it should, that first visit from the auditor should be, a week or two after Labor Day. So again, we're talking really, basically right now, right? To return end of October, beginning in November, and you have financial statements by Thanksgiving, your tax rate is set at the same time, you already have your free cash back. If you want a fall town meeting, you can do that, and again, your tax bills go out and you just coast into the new year nice and smoothly, right? I mean, your goal here is really that, all your financial processes, regardless of what it is for the prior year, are done before Christmas, so that when you folks start the budgeting process for the next year, there are no unknowns, right? It's done.
Right.
So when you guys convene for the first time, sometime in January or something to talk about the next fiscal year's budget, you actually have some data to work on that with, right? So, I mean, I know it's been tough putting a budget together, not knowing where your actual financial results are, right? And so, I mean, again, we're really hopeful that we can get you guys to a place where when you sit down to do your FY20 budget, you have some actual data to make some decisions off of.
Okay, great. Now, for fiscal year 18, we budgeted, I believe, $60,000 to
For
take.
19, you mean?
No,
Fiscal year
18.
We're in 19, we're in
No,
fiscal
in
year
18, we
19.
budgeted 30.
In 19,
But for doing 18.
For
Right.
doing
Doing-
18,
oh,
really,
doing
there's
18.
really two
Okay.
different pots of money I'm talking about. The money that it's gonna cost us to get 18 booked, reconciled, and I thought that number was
It is
60,000.
60,000.
And so my question for Justin is, do you think we're gonna be about right, or we may have to come up with some more money? I'm okay either way, a heads up.
And Derek, you responded to that earlier today.
Yeah, so I mean, so to address the two pots of money, so the FY19 money, the budget first, so that for the continued interim stuff.
Yep.
So that's fine, right? So,
Yep.
the quote that we provided, and I mean, I did recrunch the numbers this afternoon, and that'll end up being fine, right?
Okay.
For the remediation part of it, our gut right now is that we still, it should still be fine. I think we're still okay. So a better indicator will be, probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, right? So when we get the first half of the year for cash receipts reconciled and booked, and by that time we should be more than a quarter of the way through the expense rebooking. We should have a better idea of where that is billing out, right? I mean, the invoices so far for you guys have ranged fairly dramatically, and I mean, it really boils down to, there's kind of a baseline amount of time, and then it really boils down to how often do we get stuck and we spin our wheels, right? And it just You know, if everything goes smoothly, I mean, you know, if somebody's working on it for 8 hours a day, I mean, it is what it is, but it keeps moving forward. You know, for some of these things where we get stuck on something, right, now it's 2 or 3 days working on the same thing, right, like that's where the costs start to go up.
Costs go up, right.
So, you know, again, I mean, we've done enough of these financial remediation projects to know that, I mean, like, they're never going to go smoothly, right? And they're never going to just steam along. So, you know, when we put an estimate for you guys, together for you guys, I mean, we try to take into consideration the fact that it won't go well, right?
Right.
So, I mean, where we're, yeah, I mean, where we're standing right now is that you guys have used about 15% of that budget. You know, we're about 11 or 12%, I think, through where we are, right? So it's reasonable, right? I mean, you're still in the ballpark, right? I mean, if it gets to the point where you're 25% of the way through the money and we're only still 12% of the way through the project, right? I mean, that's a little bit different.
Right.
So right now, I mean, we feel that the appropriation that you guys have put forward will be very much in the ballpark.
Right.
I mean, honestly, my feeling on it is if it does end up going over, I mean, I think we're talking about short money at the
Yeah.
end to shore it up, right? Overall, I think, you know, the elements of this project were known going into it. You know, it's not like you guys just called and asked me to do it and I had to guess at what the situation was, right? I mean, because we had already seen a lot of the moving parts,
Right.
I think we were better able to estimate it. So, you know, again, I feel relatively confident that it should be okay.
And just for the benefit of townspeople and reminder to us, the work that's being done for 19 that you put a quote together for, that money we will have to appropriate.
Correct.
You know, at a special town meeting at some point this winter, right?
Right.
Because there's no magic pot of money. So, anyway, so that's just for people to know. And any other questions as regarding to the costs and stuff? And then kind of the last block was Marlene and I talked about were fund balance deficits. And
I don't want
Marlene, I'm
us to
gonna.
lose sight of those. There were a number of fund balance deficits. We took care of some of those at the January special town meeting, but there's still a number of,
There are still a number of out there. I mean, if you recall, that, you know, the town accountant had said that he believed that some portion of them were not actually in deficit, and that it was a function of adjustments that needed to be made to the accounting ledgers, right? And so, you know, at this point, you know, that was, you know, again, flashing back to what our original game plan in the late spring was, that was really a part of what we were going to have him focus on, right? Was, you know, this day-to-day stuff and work through some of this historical institutional, you know, items that go back,
Do the
you know,
research
potentially
for it,
years,
right.
right? You know, so as far as some of those go, you know, there's a lot of other things that need to be tackled first. I mean, again, a lot of those are old, right? I mean, they go far back before. So, you know, all of this work that we're investing in rebooking FY18 is not actually, it's not going to do anything, probably, or very little, probably, for those deficits that are out there. I mean, the way we have that kind of slotted into the overall plan is that, and those are items that, you know, in our mind really will end up having to get addressed probably at the end of the line, right? So
Okay.
we do FY18, we get FY19, you know, all the triage work is done, we get up to speed, and then we can circle all the way back to 2012 and start looking at, you know, what happened with some of these other things, right? Likely, many of those things, the answer will not be found, right? I mean, likely they will be funded in a similar fashion to where they were this past January, right? Where it's either going to go on the tax rate to fund them or some kind of outside infusion of money, free cash or something like that, to get rid of them if the answer cannot be established. You know, again, we did a lot of work with with Roselli and Clark, the town's auditors, you know, over the late spring and the early summer as part of that FY17 audit. And I mean, they're in the same boat. Those items have been there since they started, right? And so there's no institutional knowledge about, you know, maybe when some of these things originally popped out or what could have caused them or anything like that, right? And so the longer they sit, the harder it is to go back and remediate them, right? Because there's nobody around that was here that knew what happened to those transactionally. And again, we can see what happened in the ledger, but you have to have a lens to identify if that's reasonable or not. And I think that the answer to a lot of those items, unfortunately, will be like, short of there being a smoking gun and a rock solid source document that can refute that it's a deficit, some of them will likely just have to be raised and covered.
Justin, there's also some projects that potentially are complete, and there's money available from those projects. So that's something, I'd like to have a conversation with you in the future, as to, just to be sure that
Right.
those projects are completed, and perhaps we can repurpose the money.
Right. And it's the same, it's the exact opposite, but it's basically the same story, right? I mean, we have to be able to establish that there
Right.
actually is a high balance in them, right? So, we have a situation, for example, like in the capital project section of the accounting ledger, where we have two projects that are named the same thing, and one's in a deficit, and one has a high balance, and they almost cancel each other out, right? So you have the same thing that's in there twice, and unfortunately, the way this works is the Department of Revenue doesn't care that they may be the same thing, right? If one of them is a deficit, it doesn't matter that the other one has a high
take care
balance,
of it.
right? So it has to get taken care of. So, that's a lot of what we're trying to work through here is, if something has a high balance, does it have a high balance?
Right.
And that is just as difficult a question to answer as, what caused the deficit, right? So I would like to say that that's something that we could take a look at in the near future, but really that might be a
End of the
Down the
line.
road.
end of the line, down the road project to take a look at.
Is it reasonable, I mean, we've been meeting kind of monthly, getting updates on where we're going. Is it reasonable to do this again a month from now, or would you prefer to wait until November to meet with us, or, what are your thoughts on that?
So I would say if you folks wanted to try something toward the end of October, so based on where we think the timelines and some of these things will be,
Yeah.
I'd hate to meet a week or two early and not be able to give you the right kind of update. So looking toward either the very end of October or even that first week of November.
First week of November, okay.
We should be, I don't want to say substantially done, but exponentially further along in this project than we are now, right? I
Right.
mean, again, the way these things go is that it's already been almost 90 days since we since we started this, but the beginning of the project always goes far slower than the middle and the end, right? So, again, we expect that this picks up some momentum, halfway through going into the the final stretch. So, by the time we get to the end of October-ish, we expect that the project would be more than 50% done at that point. So that would probably be a better benchmark to have an update like this.
Okay, that'd be great. I'll let you and Marlene coordinate on what dates you might be available, and we'll plan a meeting accordingly if everyone's okay with that.
And then probably along those lines, the mid to third week of December, we perhaps again, we can talk about that in November, but that'll be the time where we'll know for sure what has been and what will be completed by end of year, end of calendar year, and then by January and where we stand, so, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, because then January,
Here we go.
we gotta start talking about budget.
Is it January already?
2020, yeah, that's right, so, yeah, that's another whole thing, so, anyway. Anybody else have any other questions for Justin, or anything that we missed?
No. I would just like to thank you for coming, and
Yeah.
it was a great presentation and explanation and question answering that you did. And I think certainly we and hopefully the townspeople have an appreciation for all the work that's going into this, but also got the appreciation for how good it all sounds as to where we're going to come out on the other end of this whole thing finally. So thank you for
Yes,
being here.
thank you very much.
Any other questions I'm going to open up the questions to the outside audience.
Thanks, Justin, for the update. It was very helpful, at least from a taxpayer's standpoint, a resident standpoint. Couple of questions on the balance sheet information, which obviously 17 ties to 18. 18 has to, is a function, 19 is a function of 18. The auditors pointed out that there were two balance sheet items that they were kind of concerned about at the end of 17. One was the receivable balances that apparently they were suggesting be adjusted so that the general ledger agrees to the point system. Did we do that?
It hasn't been done yet, no. So the way we have this structured is we're trying to get FY18 completely rebooked, right? So when we get to the part that is, we want to talk about the reconciliation, we have to compare it back to the source documents, is now that, once we get the payment information for the collector in, right? So all the other components to back into that receivable balance are there. We have all the assessor's information. The only thing we're missing is the collector's collections on that. If that's all right, when we do that loading of the FY17 items and we do that one-time adjustment to match the collector's system, it should all plug in, right? We should drop in what the collector's balance is as of July 1st, 2017. We have all of our net activity, and what comes out the other end should be what's on the collector's system for June 30th, 2018. So in terms of loading all of that end of FY17 information to roll forward to FY18, that process hasn't been completed yet because there's a fair amount of restructuring of what your balance sheet looked like in FY17 to what it looks like in FY18. So for example, you literally have 800 less account numbers.
Because they're changing the account system.
Right. So it's not a one-for-one that we can just slide it over, right? I mean, there's a fair amount of work to take this chart and consolidate it down to what the new chart is. And again, we're finding things that weren't identified, but so for example, on the receivables items, there were some items that caused reconciling items in the audit that we've subsequently found in July and August, right? So we need to take into consideration that things that were either unknown or outstanding audit item for FY17 are actually popping out in FY18 down the line. So rather than booking all of those beginning balances and then adjusting them and adjusting them and adjusting them for things that we find, the game plan is more to systematically evaluate all of FY18, and then when we book the beginning balances.
One batch of adjustments?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How about the issue of the resolving the $50,000 cash variance? Has that been resolved yet?
So again, what we're doing here is doing FY18 itself, right? Like within itself first.
Sure.
So, the conversations that we've had with the town's auditors, and this is fairly standard for most of the municipal auditors, is if there is a June 30th prior year cash reconciliation issue, so we'll just say it's around 50,000 just for conversation purposes, if we're doing our job correctly and we reconcile every single month in FY18 and FY19, there should always be the same reconciling item. So it should always be off by the same exact number. Right. If it can't be identified what causes the reconciling item, that's where we have a conversation with the auditors and the Department of Revenue about, we've proven the variance balance for say 18 months, right? That's the number.
Right.
And then it ends up being a one-time adjustment to the ledger to clear it. But no, that's not something that's unilaterally done. Again, that's a conversation between the Department of Revenue and the auditor and the town, to come up with an agreement on, we make our case for here's how we can prove everything's reconciled. FY18 gets audited to make sure that, our work is peer reviewed and everybody's in agreement. And then, if all of those things work, then there's a one-time adjustment to clear the variance.
Okay, so as of right now, the adjustments to AR and the potential adjustment to cash, that variance, they have not been made yet. You're basically saying that we're kind of holding those in advance. We're going through 18, going through 19, and at some point, when we feel we've verified those variances, then we'll take some action.
Right, the accounts receivable variance, that one will get resolved just when 18 is closed, right? So, I mean, that's more about, there were problems in 16, there were problems in, like, that has a cumulative problem, right? So it's not just gonna be fixed by what we do in FY 18. There's a problem going backwards, right? And so that's why the auditor suggested making a one-time just adjustment, you know? The problem is if I just adjust to it, and then there's these lingering items that pop out, it makes our adjustment wrong, right? So AR will get adjusted, you know, basically you end up coming full circle, right? Like we'll do everything from July 2nd all the way through FY 18. When it all ticks and ties, we'll circle back to July 1st and drop in all of the balances, you know, making sure that, again, any adjustment that we make to something that's either the auditor's recommendation or otherwise, you know, doesn't cause, you know, a downstream problem.
The plan is at this point to do it when 18 is completed, which should be on or around December 1st or something. Okay, that gets me to my next question. December 1st is kind of a key milestone date that you've mentioned in terms of having 18 management financials closed, ready for audit. And I thought I heard you say, and maybe you answered the question subsequent to that, my question subsequent to that, but I thought I heard you say that we've spent 15% of the 60,000 that was targeted for the 18 reconciliation on 12%, and 12% of the work has been done. So are you saying that between now and December 1st, you've got 88% more of that work to do?
That's about what it boils down to, yeah. So, I mean, if you break it down, so really there's, say, there's only like really 3 major components of the financials, of all the town's financials.
Yep.
The smallest and easiest piece is done, right? So everything with the assessor's office, I mean, that's been completed since the end of July, 1st of August, something like that. So, what's left is basically 40% on the, 40-ish% of the treasurer collector's part, and then the rest on the accounting and the expense side. So I mean, that's where I said, like, while the assessor's stuff is a cute little milestone, and it's great that we can pat ourselves on the back that part of it's done, right? I mean, that's not the heavy lifting, right? I mean, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. So, that's where we get into, well, really what's next, right? So, getting cash receipts and getting the treasurer collector side of the house done by, say, the mid to end of October, right? And concurrently working on the part of this that is the expense and the accounting and the warrants and the payroll part of it. The cash receipts, the assessor's part basically gets done by itself anyway, right? It's not necessarily tied to any other process. The cash receipting and the expense part have an overlapping component of it, which is why they're done concurrently.
And then the last question I had was, if in fact we find that we're having a challenge meeting the December 1st closing deadline for 18, would you at all feel comfortable in redirecting the resources that we're currently applying to fiscal 19 to make sure of that, or ensure that we do in fact close 18 by December 1st?
So that's the conversation that, we've had with the town administrator and kind of generally is that, we have allocated what we think is a sufficient amount of resources, and it varies, right? I mean, it even varies right now. I mean, there's some weeks where, there are, say, 3 or 4 people working on it, and there's some people with, there's like 9 people working on it, right? And so we try to scale it as we go so that we're not waiting to the end to say, okay, we need to allocate more resources. So for example, when we run into one of these areas where, we have this task, right? We allocate a, one person for an 8-hour day on it. If that one person makes it through their 8 hours and that task is only half done, right? Well, the next day, now there's 3 people working on it, right? So we can get done in 2 or 3 hours and we're kind of back on track, right? So it scales as we go, right? I mean, that's not to say that if there is some monumental problem down the line, right? And I'm not saying that from a perspective that I anticipate that, but anything can happen, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, the expectation would be that, if we have to reach out to the town and say, we're not going to do an AP warrant this week, we need to allocate those resources to, rather than doing an FY19 warrant, we need to reallocate those resources to rebooking FY18 warrants, then, I mean, that's something that we can reasonably do. It's a fluid enough process that it's not like, this person works on this thing and that's our only option, right? So, when we talk about, do we think we'll have a problem hitting that, 1st of December timeline? I mean, the answer is we reasonably don't think it'll be a problem. And if it does get missed, it should be by a minor amount, right? I mean, if I tell you December 1st and it's done on December 5th, right? I mean, in our minds, that's a reasonable miss. I mean, you might disagree with it, but, we are shooting for this, what is really an artificial timeline of it's done before the auditors get here, and we'd like to think, and what we said is that we will do whatever it takes to hit that number or hit that deadline. And again, when we get back to, Daryl's question about, does the $60,000 cover it? Obviously the costs start going up. If I think that 4 or 5 people need to work on your project, then all of a sudden there's 9 or 10 people working on it, right? The cost obviously starts going up. But again, over the course of the entire project, we think it should take this amount of time, and whether it's 10 people doing this total amount of time or 1 person, right? I mean, the costs should equal themselves out over the course of the project. So again, we feel that time-wise and cost-wise, it's on track.
So there's an expectation on the part of the finance team, I would assume that at this point that December 1st is the deadline that everyone's shooting for, and that we will continue along that line, and if there's any kind of challenges, you'll keep them informed. And at the same time, 19 will continue to be booked and kept to date. So if in fact there comes a situation where you conclude that I've got to redirect resources from 19 to 18 to get that completed by December 1st. I'm just wondering whether you need to get some sort of a understanding on the
But
part
aren't
of
we
the
sort
finance
of
committee.
talking
that that's
hypothetical?
okay.
I mean, he's already set his deadline, so we'll have to wait. I guess we get a better idea in end of October. I mean, I'm not gonna, I don't think it's our right to tell him how to use his resources and his company, and you know what I'm saying? I mean, he sort of knows where he's got to be at and what we need, and he's working with DOR and our finance committee. So I think we got to give him the faith to be able to do all that.
Well, and I think that by having, I'm sorry, Daryl, and I think by having in November, that early November, late October, early November meeting, you'll 6 weeks from now, you'll have a better idea of how much further you've gotten, and we can have a conversation should something need to change, and staffing-wise,
So the percentages that we're talking about certainly might indicate the volume of work,
Right.
but they don't correlate to the pace necessarily either. I mean, it doesn't necessarily take 12% of the time to do 12% of the work, and then 80% of the time to do the other 80%, even though there's a volume there. You might pick up speed at some point if you can get some things out of the way.
Traction.
So they would improve exponentially the progress between now and then, which is that basic.
Right,
Okay.
I mean, that's the reasonable I mean, that's the way, that'll be the indicator if the project is actually on track, right? So like, if we in the next few weeks, we don't start actually making sufficient forward progress, right? I mean, that's the indicator that A, either we have to adjust the staffing levels, or B, that we're running into some issues that are far above and beyond what we've reasonably expected to happen, right? And I mean, again, what we reasonably expect to happen as far as these remediation things go, I mean, is probably different than what you would reasonably expect to run into, right? I mean, so it's, again, we like to think that we've planned for the worst and hope for the best, right? It's, and it's not often that the worst ends up being far worse than we thought. So, again, I mean, and if it would help, alleviate any things, I mean, we can certainly, between now and the end of October, do like a written update memo too, right? So, you folks decide amongst yourselves, what kind of, tangible update you want on the progress of the project, and, I mean, we can certainly accommodate that if that would help.
Right. So my question, and thank you, Justin, for that, is how, we have the money set aside for 18. We did that in the budget. And in 19, Justin and his team are essentially the accountants right now because of the medical. But we're also continuing to pay our accountant.
That's correct.
And so what pot of money are we paying Bay
He is
State?
being paid out of that 60,000.
It's
So
being paid out of the
there's-
60.
I've
Yeah, that-
separated those expenses just
Oh,
so we can
into the
track
two.
what's accounting. So
Okay.
even though, we've expended 23,000, not all of that is just for 18.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me.
So there is a column that says fiscal year 18
Right.
recon closure. The other
Yep.
column identifies the expense on the accounting
Right, because I
services.
just want to make sure that we're actually paying him
Yes,
for his
we are.
work.
We are.
I mean, number one, and, number two, at some point, if something comes up and we have to find money, what are we going, we'll have to come up with a strategy to do that, whether it's finance reserve or some other pot of money that we can reasonably use until the time comes that we can go to a special town meeting. Okay.
Well, thank you,
And
Justin.
one last question.
Is it a good one?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it'll be quick or not, but it kind of deals with what Darrell was talking about in a sense, possibility of having money available to redirect into accounting expenses. The 10 line items, more or less, that were identified as stagnant balances, which total, according to the audit, the management letter, well over $250,000. Did you say that you had to basically try to reconcile these numbers? I mean, these are numbers that Roselli has shared with the community. Did you say you have more work to do to verify these numbers?
I mean, we would like to verify them first, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, Roselle, because if you were to ask Roselli and Clark to, say without a shadow of a doubt that those are all high balances and that you can definitely spend them, right? I mean, I think the answer you're going to get is, well, no, that's not what we're saying, right? I mean, he's identifying what is on the ledger, and there's nothing to the contrary necessarily that says that it's not real, but it's not an actual verification that they're there.
So if you have to spend time verifying these balances that are called stagnant balances, and they potentially total $250,000, is that going to be a priority between now and December 1st as well? Because if in fact we're looking for monies potentially to
That's gonna be-
fund
At the end.
That's at the end.
At the very
He
end.
addressed that, he said that would be
Be at
taken
the
care of
very
at
end.
the end.
at the end of what,
This
18?
entire
After-
process.
After the process, after 18 is done and after 19 is comfortably
Mm-hmm.
caught up, then he would be able to
And
take
you're
on
comfortable with
some.
that by not having these numbers verified before a potential special town meeting at some point in the winter?
Well, I think, Mike, I don't want to speak for Justin, but I think part of it is the work they're doing now could in fact address some of those down the road, because they'll uncover something as they're going through 18 and 19,
Something may come up.
potentially.
I think
But
we have
we got to stay on track with 18 and 19.
I think we have to let the
In my
process
opinion.
unfold as Justin has laid out for us and be patient and see where we end. I'm confident we'll
Right,
get
and I mean,
there.
I'll say that that's just one example of some areas where there's some additional work that probably has to be invested, right? I mean, there's high balances, there's also low balances, there's also a whole host of other things that really need some additional work, right? So, I mean, we're talking about, even rebooking FY18, getting everything submitted, getting the tax rate, getting the free cash, getting 18 audited, and getting 18 done, right? I mean, your reality still is that for some period of time, right? I mean, we have a 5 to 6 to 10 year period where who knows what happened, right? And so, while I mean, I'd like to think that once all this stuff is rebooked and everything's done, I mean, there'll be still instances where things will come up, right? The past will keep coming back, right? And so, honestly, one of the things that's on the agenda for us, once all these things are done, is we're going to go back and look at all of the filings that the town has done for various state agencies, right? So we know, for example, that that this statistical report Schedule A, right? I mean, we reviewed the FY16 one that was submitted, and it doesn't correspond to what you have on the ledger, right? So there's a number of there'll be more things to do afterwards, right? Like plenty of things.
Clean up.
And some of them, we can place certain priorities on those, right? So certainly the deficit account and the high balance accounts would take a priority over reviewing, statistical filings, right? But there certainly are a number of things, and as we go through this process, I mean, again, we expect that we'll find items to put on that punch list that aren't necessarily germane today, but we're going to need to circle the wagons on
Right.
afterwards.
So, I just, lastly, not for Justin, but for all of us, I was just thinking about our next meeting, and everybody's got kind of crazy schedules, and it would probably be good if you kind of looked at end of October, early November, and just put together some dates that you guys might be available for a meeting, so we can kind of send them to Marlene and the board, so they look at it, if that works, so.
And also remember, the better things in life take time.
Oh, yes, they do.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Ed's motto.
Yes, thank you, Justin, we
Thank you.
appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
All right. Do you guys have anything else? And then I hate to say it, but probably in that November meeting, we ought to have some preliminary discussions about our 2020 budgeting, just priorities, because we're not that far away where we want to send a letter out to departments and give them an idea of what they ought to be thinking about. So, anyway, just food for thought.
Well said, Ed.
Thank you.
Want me to adjourn?
Motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second? I second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thanks,
Motion
everybody.
carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.